Welcome, dear viewer. I hope you're having a wonderful night. Tonight, I'll be telling some terrifyingly scary stories. I hope you are warm and ready. Let's begin. I think I've posted this story as a comment somewhere before, but nonetheless, I am going to share it again. So I've always been open to paranormal things. I recall several things as a child, but the older I get, the less I see as adulthood and responsibilities have overtaken my ability to see things that I once did. I had a son in January of 2011. By 2013, when he was almost 2 years old, we had moved out of my mother's house into our own apartment. It was kind of a rushed ordeal, as my mother and I butted heads a lot, and as soon as I had the money, I went to the first available opening. The apartment manager had actually asked me to hold on for an extra 2 weeks because, as she said, some girls were moving to Florida and left the place a mess, and it needed cleaning up. She never asked for a credit check, any references, or anything else. It was just an okay, I'll let you know as soon as the rental is up to par. I moved in probably a month after she said I could have the unit. Upon moving in, I had a strange but comforting feeling. I started out with nothing but a box of toys and a nice blow-up mattress for myself and my almost 2-year-old son to share. It was a 2-bedroom apartment with 1 bathroom and lots of closet space. Eventually, we made it home. But one day, my son was in the spare bedroom, what was going to be his room, and started laughing. A hearty baby laugh that takes work to muster from any baby. Really. I walk in and he is staring at a corner and acts as though he doesn't even see me in there. Then suddenly he stops. Anyone with a child knows this is a little odd. The child will normally look to the source of entertainment for more. But my son just stopped and toddled toward me as if told to do so. It seemed odd, but I dismissed it. Fast forward a few months. We've got our own beds. Although I let him sleep in mine, and I woke one night to his belly, laughing once again. Full of giggles in the darkness. Nothing but the moonlight through the sheer curtains is bouncing from my face onto his, since I'm the one facing the window, and he's looking over my shoulder into the darkness. A big smile is spread over his face as I say, "What's so funny, my honey?" And he says, "The Mayana," as he's still gazing over my shoulder. But then his smile gets scared and serious, and he puts his tiny finger over his lips as though he's mimicking someone, and he says, "Shuh, no mama, no man, go night." Needless to say, I did not go that night. Days, weeks, and small incidents happened where he'd be laughing or talking about his friend. I started not worrying about it because to me, it wasn't that big of a deal. He stopped being creepy at night. One day though, he was in what was supposed to be his room, just cracking up and laughing once again. When he came into the living room, I asked him, "What's so funny in there, bud?" And he replied, "The man. He's funny. He tells me jokes. He is not a monster. He tells me jokes. He's nice, mama." I was like, "Oh, look. He's got an imaginary friend. Wonderful. Whatever." This goes on another week or two, until one day he's in his room having a full conversation. I don't recall what. I just remember hearing him chatting in there as if having an actual conversation, and him repeating a word I knew he didn't know. It's too big for an almost 2-year-old's vocabulary. He comes into the living room, and I ask again, "Who are you talking to in there?" He says, "The man, mama." I knew I shouldn't ask, but I did, and I said, "What's the man look like?" And he replies, "Bumpy. He's bumpy." He's bumpy. "You look like a monster, but not a moonster, mom. He nice. He tells me jokes. He nice." I am sitting there like, okay, cool. This is totally an imaginary friend. All is fine. And that was that. A few days later, I wake up suddenly to a fight in the hallway. My next-door neighbor had come home drunk and was banging on her apartment door like a complete psycho. I had grown up rather comfortable in a town where, literally, locking your doors was optional. So for once, I went to the door to lock it so this woman wouldn't accidentally open my door, and it was already locked. The door handle, the deadbolt, and the chain lock. I had never locked the deadbolt, let alone the chain lock. I was confused, but wrote it off as me being a tired mom. The next morning, bright and early, my son woke me up to say, "Mama, the man saves us. He locked the door from bad lady, Mama." Again, I write it off as he heard the commotion the night before and credited his imaginary friend for my actions. Later that day, I had just gotten a carload of groceries, and I took the first few bags in and up the stairs, and I got a movie in for my son to occupy him while I got the rest inside. I go out on maybe the third or fourth trip, and a neighbor catches me. She's my age. I hadn't met her before, but she seems kind. She approaches me and introduces herself, then asks, "Maybe this isn't appropriate, but how much did you pay for that apartment?" I didn't exactly know the rules for how units were priced or what you had, so I just vaguely asked why. And she said, "Well, did they tell you what happened there?" And I was like, "No." Ooh. She said she was waiting on some girls to move out who were going to Florida, but I trailed off. She says, "No. There was a dad and son who lived there. They both had that, like, genetic disease where you get bumps or polyps all over your skin. The son killed himself in the spare bedroom by overdosing. Nobody knew for days. They had all sorts of cleaning crews in there. It's a shame too, because he'd always tell my kids jokes and say, 'See, I tell jokes. I'm not a monster.' He was so sweet to my boys. He was so worried about scaring them. He'd always tell them jokes." This is a real-life 100 story that happened to me. In 2003, I met a guy who said he would take me on adventures and make my life exciting. Little did I know that the safe world I had grown up in was about to be shattered. I lived in a small town and had never really traveled outside of my state. I never experienced life in a way that others would. We were kind of sheltered from the big crime and other things that have been happening in the countryside. So my, now ex, decided to take me on a journey of being an over-the-road truck driver. In a lot of cases, this was a great experience. There were a lot of fun times, and I got to see most of the US. But trucking life is hard, and being on the road 24/7 isn't easy. Being cooped up in a small truck with someone for that long will cause anyone to become mad. Life on the road is much different now than it was when I was trucking. People now have advancements in technology and the ability to binge watch their favorite YouTube channel, surf the web, or play games on their phones to keep themselves occupied. The only forms of entertainment we had were either watching one of the dozen or so DVDs, reading yet another book, or talking on the radio. We often opted for talking on the radio, and this became our version of social media, long before Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter were even a thought. Just like we do now, we create a different identity or persona to hide behind while interacting with people who are basically strangers. And trust me, truckers can be creepy, and keeping a bit of anonymity is the only way to stay safe on the road. When you're a trucker, you acquire a CB handle. My ex's was Ninja Dwarf, changed for his safety, and mine was Baby, and I'm from Alaska, so mine ended up being Northern Exposure. Again, changed for safety reasons. During your time on the road, you meet a lot of crazy people and see a ton of crazy stuff. And I do mean a ton of crazy shit. People often hear about stories of things that happen on the road. Most of them are more gross than scary. Yeah, no. Like drivers getting a little too friendly with their cabin buddy, whether it be a dog, cat, or even goat. But this time, this is one of the most terrifying experiences I had in my life. And when it comes to strange and unusual events, my life is full of them. Have you ever gotten the heebie-jeebies from someone's voice? Like flat out scared to talk to someone? A voice that makes you think that the person on the other line is not all there. That was this guy. Something about him just made my skin crawl, and I had only ever heard his voice through the crackle of the CB radio. The CB started to crackle, and we heard the distant call. You could barely hear a voice through the static, but eventually he got close enough that we could hear him clearly. He must have been 50 miles or so behind us, because it was still faint, but our CB radio was peaked and tweaked and could really reach out and touch someone, so we could just hear him through the chatter of the CB. And then I heard it. That voice. It's hard to explain, but the best way I could now describe it would be like how Heath Ledger talks as the Joker in the Batman movie. There was something just off about it, and it gave me chills. He simply said, "Hey there." Purple Pete, the color of our truck. My ex hollered back. We were heading to Arkansas. The driver said he was going the same way, asked if he could tag along with us, and introduced himself as Maniac. We would run from one coast to the other and back again. The guy always seemed to be running the same route as us, but we had never physically seen his truck. He described it as a 378 long-nosed Peterbilt that was black and had a brow and cattle guard. According to him, he ran dry boxes from California to Florida, which explained why he always seemed to be either coming or going on the I-10. One week, when we were running from Florida back to La, we caught up to him on his back trip from Redmond, Washington to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He told us he would meet up with us in Nevada when we did our trip back because by that time, we would have run out of hours and needed to take a rest. We said, sure, even though I totally didn't want to meet this guy, that my ex had become friends with him. So we gave him an eat-up on when we would be back in the area and what truck stop we would be at and told him we would meet up for a meal with him. This was really before the idea of having a cell phone for anything other than emergencies. So it wasn't like we could just call him when we were going to be in the area. He agreed, and we parted ways. My ex continued talking to him until the radio could no longer reach him. We had finished our load and were heading back to Las Vegas to the truck stop we agreed on and waited for. Las Vegas is a shady place for truckers in general. Lots of crime and lots of bad stuff happen. So we waited in the truck. Finally, we got bored and ventured into the truck stop for a bit. We waited, and eventually we had enough time to take another load. So we headed out, never actually meeting up with him in Nevada. But a few months later, we ran into him in Oklahoma. We had heard some chatter on the radio about these lot lizards, truck stop hookers, getting brutally murdered at truck stops in Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Tennessee. But we chalked it up to drama on the radio after all. We had quite literally nothing better to do than make up truck driver stories. We had kept hearing about it and even brought it up to Maniac, and he just laughed and said it must be one real sick fuck doing it. It must just be a story, because if it were true, they would have caught him already. I bet he has even left fingerprints or cement at the crime scene, with as bloody and messy as it was. I bet he wants to get caught. It seemed like a weird thing to say, but he was a very weird guy, so that was totally in character for him. Maniac went his way, and we went ours, and after a while, I forgot about the weird comment. Fast forward to a few weeks later. We were in Mississippi, and we heard a familiar voice on the radio. It was Maniac. We had taken a long weekend because it was Labor Day and most companies were okay, with drivers taking an extra day off. Our plan was to make it to this lake out in the middle of nowhere. We were going to drop off our trailer and head out to Bobtail. So we chatted, and he said he was heading to Tennessee and that he would be heading out the next morning. And so, cutting our much-needed break short and bypassing the weekend at the lake, my ex decided to run with him so that there was someone to talk to. We had gotten into an argument earlier, and I wasn't talking to him, and he absolutely hated the silent treatment. Our load was to be delivered in North Carolina in a few days. So being a few hours ahead of the deadline just meant we would be at the top of the line to pick our load back When? We left that morning and headed out. The guys decided we would stop in Tennessee, and finally, after about 6 months of chatting, meet each other. We weren't afraid to meet up with him, but I was still very on edge. I was no slouch. I grew up with 15 boys in the house, and I was a known fighter. My ex was a bigger dude, standing 6'3" and about 280 elbs. So in theory, we could take him if need be. The only way he could get the best of us was if he had a weapon, which back then was highly illegal to have in trucks. And if you were caught by Dot, it was jail time, no questions asked. With our company, we had very specific fuel stations we could use to top off. Maniac was an owner-operator, so he could go anywhere. Maniac said he'd already stopped to get fuel and took a shower, but he would drop his trailer and meet us at a Flying J patrol station. That was down the road from where he was, which I believe was a Love's fuel station. So we get ready to fuel up. We showered and got a booth at the restaurant. We waited about 45 minutes before ordering food, and I waited and waited. No one ever showed up, and there was no way to contact him. My ex was not a patient man, so we ate and then headed back to our truck. I remember it being dark and humid. It was probably 10 p.m. or so. There wasn't much noise at this truck stop, which was unnerving. A quiet truck stop is a creepy truck stop. We walked across the fuel island to be greeted by a shit ton of flashing lights. It's not uncommon for either lizards to get busted or drivers to get involved in shit. They are not supposed to, so we didn't think much of it. Cops at a truck stop go hand in hand. But this was more than just your typical truck stop shenanigans. We passed 12 trucks or so. This was one of the bigger Flying Gs, so it could probably fit about 80 trucks and trailers if you went all the way back to the dirt. And then you could find a dozen or so trucks in the dirt lot, which happened to be where our truck was. Now I'm a curvy girl, not fat, but I don't look like I belong in a truck stop. I was used to drivers looking at me all creepy like. I always got taunted and harassed for being a lizard, even though I was a driver. In fact, there are some truck stops that are not safe to walk into alone. I was walking with my ex, and we weren't holding hands or anything, but it was obvious I was with him. We walked down the row and saw a bobtail truck parked in a full parking spot. I thought it was weird that he was in a truck space with no trailer. Typically, bobtail trucks will park at the end of a run and leave the big spaces for trucks with trailers, because that is yet another unspoken truck driver rule. We moved by the bobtail truck. It was a dark truck, maybe a dark black or blue with a cattle guard and a brow. I don't remember seeing what type of truck it was, just that it was kind of menacing in the dark. The old school trucker code was that if you were looking for company, the driver would park and leave his red light on to tell lot lizards that the driver was looking for entertainment. The guy was sitting in the passenger seat. He had the red reading light on so I could see his face. It was a little distorted, but he gave me the creepiest smile and then quickly shut his blinds. We were about 6 trucks down from the bobtail. I could see his truck from ours. I remember looking back and seeing the red light sill illuminating the porthole window in the passenger door, and a small slit down the curtain showed a dark spot. He was still watching us. Even as warm as it was, chills shot up my spine, and I got a very uneasy feeling, my gut wrenched with a sudden feeling of dread. We finally got back to the truck and turned on the CB for our nighttime entertainment, and to see if we could radio Maniac to see what the deal was. The chatter was about all the cops, the ambulance, fire truck, and Dot. All the commotion was basically across from us, but 2 rows up. People were saying there was a dead lizard, and it was bad, like gnarly. One driver started trying to explain it, but he was then told that he had to keep his mouth shut by a police officer. Being the nosy people we are, my ex and I jump out of the truck to go investigate. We dodged in and out of the trucks and managed to wiggle our way up to the scene. You know when you hear the phrase, "some things cannot be unseen." This was one of them. The lady, what was left of her, had been tied to the trailer and the truck. Then someone pulled the kingpin, that piece that locks the two together, and let down the landing gear. The driver, who was now sitting in the back of a police car, was cuffed. His head hung limp, and his forehead was on the back of the seat. He was crying big, heavy sobs, and there was vomit on his shirt. We could hear them through the closed door. He wailed that he had nothing to do and prayed to God to forgive him for what he had done. That poor driver had obviously not done his safety check before he left and just decided to pull out of his space. While she was freaking attached, she got ripped apart, right in half. Without getting too graphic, I can tell you that a normal human body should never look like that, and it was like something you would probably see in the Saw movies. I remember stumbling back and bumping into another driver. He just looked at me, pale, and looked as if he was going to get sick. I don't do well with that body function, so I moved quickly away from him and started making my way back to the truck. I was almost running back. Zero fucks given that I should have waited for my ex, because he had the keys. I made it to the truck and tugged on the door, but it wouldn't open. So I ran to the truck stop at full speed. I was going to get sick, and I'd rather not have people see me. I passed the spot where the bobtail truck was parked, and it was gone. My ex made it into the truck and stopped looking for me, and he said he would walk me back to the truck so I could get some sleep. Yeah, right, like I could sleep after seeing that. He turned on the radio and began to talk to the other drivers. No one had seen anything. There hadn't even been much lizard traffic. The police had been working overtime cleaning up the truck stops after they had caught wind of the first few murders. I sat in the bunk and just kind of stared out of the windshield at the flashing lights. There was a tap on the door. A police officer said he was getting statements from everyone at the truck stop, giving us the rundown about safety and numbers and not going anywhere alone. I wasn't planning on leaving the truck. I told him about the creepy guy that smiled at me in the bobtail truck and the description of the truck. The officer didn't see the point of me telling him about a creepy guy, but he took down the information anyway. I don't think I slept for days after that. I just kept seeing that image. Flashes kept going through my head. The vivid image of her face was that she had a red rag in her mouth, and the 105 tape around her wrists tying her to the headache rack. She had obviously struggled because bruises had formed on her stomach and her face, and mascara was running down her cheeks, and the smell was like rotten meat and blood. It makes my stomach queasy just thinking about it. It didn't seem to faze my ex. He went on like it wasn't anything big or special. After a few weeks, I finally managed to get the image out of my head, or I had finally convinced myself that it wasn't real, and that it was just a scene from a horror movie. Either way, I was glad, for the time being, to have it out of my head. Fast forward, and it was February, about 3 months after that incident, and we were heading to New Orleans. I was super excited to see the area and hopefully get in to see the Mardi Gras. I wanted to visit the cemeteries to see the mausoleums and go into the voodoo shops and such. We had a few extra hours to spend there, so I was happy when my ex said we could go wandering around. We parked at this little truck stop. It was one that didn't show up on the big Rand McNally maps, and we were told about it by another driver. It really wasn't more than a hole in the wall. Mom and pop shop with a small dirt lot and a flickering light pole on one end, but it was within walking distance of the French Quarter, which was where I wanted to go. Hey there, Purple Pete. What brings you out this way? The voice on the CB was loud, so he was really, really close. There were only 2 other trucks in the lot. An old Freightliner hauling a Swift trailer and a dark green Kenworth that had a cattle car on the back hauling cows. My ex was still a bit miffed about being stood up months ago. He could really hold a grudge when he wanted. Maniac, hey man, where the hell have you been? Why did you stand us up there, good buddy? My ex radioed back. Oh man, you know how it is. Cops make me a bit uneasy, and I'd rather not get fucking caught. He said it with chuckle. Caught? What do you mean caught? My ex was questioned. Don't worry about it. You just keep an eye on your girl. I'd really hate for something bad to happen to her, like all of those other girls." He trailed off. We watched the CB key up again, burying the needle on the radio. The signal was high. It had to be in the same fucking truck stop to ping so high. Silence. He was keyed up, but just kind of breathing in the mic. You know, with all the bad things I've been doing in the truck stops, I like to play with the lizards before I torture them and destroy them. Hey, those nasty sluts. They shouldn't be defiling themselves with drugs and sex like they do. It sounded like he was talking through gritted teeth. Silence. His voice was even louder this time. We could hear the rumble of a truck heading down the one-way street that ended at the truck stop. Only God and the devil have the authority to judge my sins. I will continue to rid this world of the diseased ones that plague humanity. We looked at each other. This was the only time I had ever seen anything like fear in my ex's eyes. Tears began to well up, and for the first time, I was scared, like truly scared. A dust cloud came rolling up to the truck stop, and this dark, menacing Peterbilt with a cattle guard and brow came rolling by slowly. The driver keyed in just as he went past the nose of our truck. It was that same creepy guy from the truck stop months ago. He smiled that fucking disgusting smile at us as he put the mic on his lips. Be safe out there, Ninja Dwarf and Northern Exposure. His kiwi handle was pinstriped on his driver door. It said Maniac in bright red letters. In April of 2004, we headed back to Alaska because my ex's father had a massive heart attack. We stayed there for a while before heading back on the road. As far as I know, there were 7 total murders. There could have been more. Who knows how long he has actually been ridding the world of its sins? I don't know if the guy was ever caught. I can tell you one thing though. The second time around, I wasn't making friends with anyone on the road, and I always kept a 6 blade on me at all times, just in case I ever ran into Maniac. My friend and I are still trying to process exactly what we saw the other day. We've talked it through countless times, trying to logically figure out how this was possible. Hopefully, someone on here can give us some thoughts and ideas as to what actually happened. So I recently purchased a small bass boat, and my first mate Lagov and I have been super eager to explore the lake and its islands, as well as learn the fishing around it. We're new to Tennessee. Yesterday, on the 4th of July, we decided to go fishing in this very secluded part of the lake we named No Man's Land. Because of the low-hanging bridge that prevents boaters from entering the section, my boat can make it underneath because of how small it is. But I've never seen another boat in there. We decided to go deeper into the cove than we've ever been before. As we're slowly trolling down the lake, the path before us splits into 3 forks, and I ask which fork we should take. Lagov immediately says the middle one, so we continue straight as the water changes from a large lake to a narrow river-like path. This is where a chain of events happened in quick succession, and we've talked through it after the fact to try and recall the order of how this went down. First, we heard a weird vocal-like noise coming from the woods beyond the shoreline, and we both tensed up and felt very uneasy. "What was that?" Lagov asked. "A dog," I said, as that was the first thing that came to mind. "I don't think that was a dog," Lagov answered immediately. Then we saw a bird high above us, perching on a branch, staring at us. "Maybe it was that bird," Lagov said. "Yeah, maybe," I answered. I'm not sure when it got into my hand, but at some point I drew my pistol and held it down at my side. Lagov held the fishing bow. We both had a very weird feeling as we drifted down the river, our eyes glued to the bank. We came to a rotting pine tree that had fallen and was now half submerged in the water, sitting on the shoreline. Then it happened. We hear a very loud, heavy-footed animal running through the woods, getting closer to the water. At first, I thought it was a deer, as it was almost prancing, but as it got closer and louder, We both realized it was in fact not a deer. It was a very large, jet black canine. My brain thought, oh, it must be a coyote, but this was much bigger, like a huge German shepherd, and it was fast, like a black shadow, leaping through the trees and quickly approaching the bank that we were floating across from. It didn't seem to have any texture or details though, almost like it was flat and blurry. We couldn't see fur or its face and eyes, just the outline of its body and tall wolf-like ears. But it was obviously the body of a canine. Adrenaline started rushing through us, and my brain raced, thinking we were about to have to defend ourselves. It almost looked as if it were charging at us, but it was zagging and dodging through the trees toward the exact portion of shoreline we were floating past. We were scared, but the 15 feet of water between our boat and the shoreline gave us some confidence. It would have to swim out to us, and I didn't see that as likely. It continued its leap through the woods and quickly reached our portion of the shoreline. In one majestic fluid motion, it leaped off the shore and dove into the water right under the half-submerged pine tree in front of us. Stomp, 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 stomp. Splash. That was it. We held our breath as we waited to hear it swim or move toward us. Small ripples reached our boat from the splash. After the fact, Legov swears the splash should have been much bigger for a creature that size. Watch for it to come back up, I whispered. I had never heard of canines being able to submerge themselves underwater, but here it was happening right in front of our eyes. We waited. Nothing. Silence. Just the subtle sound of the ripples made it slowly dissipate. We waited about 20 more seconds, and still nothing. It was almost as if the entire forest had shut off. Silence. Our eyes were glued to the fallen pine tree. It dove under. Maybe it's just standing in the water under the tree, Legov says. We get the courage to troll the boat a little closer to inspect the tree, but there's nothing. There was no sign of anything. At this point, we're in complete shock. Stunned. It's gone. How could it be gone? How does something that big just vanish, especially a huge creature like that? After 30 more seconds of silence, Legov breaks it with, "You saw what I saw, right?" A shiver flashes down my spine. "All of it," I reply. "Really though? What the fuck was that?" Legov said. I replied, "I think we saw a demon," and we both nervously laughed. We stay floating near the shoreline in shock for at least another 10 minutes, hoping for a sign that we weren't crazy. Legov scoured the waters, looking to see if it would come up for air. It never did. How the hell could a big black wolf-like creature disappear into thin air, or water for that matter? Being skeptics, there has to be a logical explanation for what we saw, but we can't find one. If it had just splashed the water and gotten out again. 1, we would have seen it walk away in whatever direction. And 2, we would have heard it as anything putting weight on the leaves makes a loud noise. But it was just silence. The loudest of silences. We live in Middle Tennessee, if that helps at all. We're still a little shaken up by this. This is 100 true. We are not bullshitting you.